Hi, I'm Harris Solomon. I'm a cultural anthropologist at Duke University, and in this module we'll learn about interviewing. In this lesson we'll discuss how to analyze interview data. You've completed your interview. Congratulations. Now you have a pile of paper. You have jottings, you may have documents, you have specific quotes from a transcript if you recorded the interview and transcribed it. Now, what do you do with it? In this lesson, we'll first talk about writing field notes. Field notes are the coin of the realm in ethnographic interviewing. They are what you write to recount an interview. We'll also talk about the process of transcription. A transcription is a direct account of an interview's audio recording. We'll talk about the differences between a field note and a transcription and why it's important to have both. Next, we'll talk about what you do with those two sources of data, your field notes and your transcripts, through a process that's called coding. Coding is the analysis of recurrent themes. And lastly, we'll think together about how you write up the results of your interview. That is, how you integrate the work you've done with coding into an output, like a report or an article. The most important element of ethnographic data production is what's called a field note. A field note is a descriptive account of each interview. Think of your jottings like pieces of a puzzle. They're raw elements of your data. A field note is a more polished, full account of those jottings, stitched together in one written document, usually typed. You expand your jottings to constitute a full account, a narrative account, a subjective account. That is what a field note is. The field note records your impressions, your hunches, and your questions, in addition to what you remember happening. So a field note records not only what happened, but your thoughts about what happened. Remember that it's important to have one field note per interview. This will keep your files clean. You can name your files based on the individual interview, and this will allow you to go back for in-depth examination for data analysis. A field note has several key components. First, it's narrative. It's usually written in the first person, or I. This is useful because it allows you to input subjective assessments of what occurred in an interview and how you think that the interview might be addressing questions of the larger project. It's okay to have a subjective analysis here. The transcript will give you a more objective account of what was said. Second, it's useful to describe the interview setting. Were you in a room together? Were you walking? Describe it a little bit. Paint a picture or tell a story. This will also help you recall later on down the line where you were in a particular moment in the research project. Next, the field note tracks what is observed along with what is said. If you're doing an interview while performing another action, say asking someone to demonstrate for you a particular process or practice, it can be useful to describe what you observed in addition to the words that were exchanged. Next, it's good to recall what your questions or ideas were, even though they may not have been verbalized during the course of the interview transcript. An interview can be multiscalar, so that means that a field note can be too. Multiscalar means that people speak at the level of granularity, but they also speak at the level of broad questions. So your field note can tack back and forth between the details of a particular question and also hunches, ideas, and leads towards larger issues in the research project. It recounts the interview again and also reflects on the larger project. This is what makes field notes so useful. At every point of recording data, you're recording the granularity of the individual account with your respondent, but you're also reflecting on how that piece fits into the broader puzzle of the project. There are a few best practices for writing field notes. The first one is that if you're writing them yourself and you're only doing the project by yourself, then you will write all of the field notes. However, if you're working in a team of other researchers and colleagues, it's important that every single person write a field note for every interview. Don't take turns. Make sure that each person who observes and encounters the interview records their impressions in a field note. This is essential Because an interview is a social act, it is going to be subjective in terms of how it is interpreted. And this is an asset rather than a liability. Getting different people's elements of impressions in a field note will strengthen your analysis in the long run. It will highlight different areas of attention and areas where you might not agree. When in doubt, always describe. Describe what you see, what you hear, and what you're thinking. Think of a field note as a narration, a story that you're telling yourself about the research process, much like you would in a lab note. And lastly, an interview is time delimited, and so too is a field note. I like to say that it is important that a field note be written within 24 hours after completing an interview. Human memory is quite fragile. It's amazing how we forget really key things that are said or things that we observe a day after they happen. So be sure to reserve time for yourself, not only for the interview and not only for assessing your jottings, but for the time it will take to write the field note based on the interview itself. Even as a field note is a subjective account of an interview, the transcript is a direct account of the interview. It records what is said precisely by both the interviewer and the interviewee. It's a direct textual account, and therefore it directs the reader towards specific terms that matter to an interviewee. Your jottings may not quite get a specific term that matters to your respondent, but a transcript can. However, transcribing an interview can be laborious. It's essential, but it's also time-consuming. Remember that it takes about 3 minutes of transcription work for every 1 minute of an audio-recorded interview. Plan for this ahead of time. If your interview is planned to last for 30 minutes, it will take you 90 minutes to transcribe. If it's lasting 1 hour, it will take 3 hours to transcribe. So if you're limited on time, think about shortening your interview to allow for enough time for transcription. The transcript records exactly what was said, but it also is a mirror back onto the interview process writ large. As you alternate between the interviewer and the interviewee and their words, you can look at stretches of text and see who is occupying most of the airspace. Is it your respondent who's speaking the most? Are you speaking the most? And for how long? In other words, after you transcribe a few interviews, you'll get a sense of your interview technique, and you may learn that you might need to be more precise, more terse, or by contrast, you might need to expand a bit more if you see that your respondent is constantly asking you to clarify. Once you have your transcripts and your field notes together, you can embark on a process that's called coding. Coding is a thematic analysis. It assesses field notes and transcripts for key and recurring themes. Coding can be done in different ways. It usually begins with things that are intrinsic to the interview. What I mean by intrinsic is by specific phrases, terms, or ideas that your respondent offers you. This is what's called an emic analysis, E-M-I-C. It evolves from within the interview rather than outside it. It begins from analytics and ideas that your respondent provides rather than that you provide. So say your respondent discusses optimization frequently, and you see that over the course of 5 different interviews with 5 different respondents, that optimization is an issue that they all discuss. This is a signal that optimization is a recurring and potentially important theme. You'll take note of that in the process of coding. A coding can also, of course, be extrinsic to the interview. Say you're interested in processes of labor in hospital work. The person that you're interviewing may never use the term labor. They may use the term work. They may describe their work hours. They may talk about being tired. But you know that this has to do broadly with the issue of labor. So a coding schema, which is a list of themes that recur throughout the interviews and field notes, are a list of what happens from within the interview, intrinsic terms, and ideas that emerge from outside it, extrinsic terms. Coding can be done in qualitative data analysis software. In this software, you input all of the textual data, like interview transcripts and your field notes, and the software can assess which themes are recurring and the frequency by which they're recurring. However, this can also be quite complicated. I find that it's useful simply to use sticky notes on a wall. For every theme, whether it's intrinsic or extrinsic, you can put a sticky note on the wall and then see through color coding or through the amount of notes that you have what is accruing as important. This is a really useful way visually to see how themes are emerging and why. Remember that themes in an interview scheme that emerge as codes can also have relationships. For example, if labor is a parent relationship, a child relationship might be specific types of labor. So once you get a lot of sticky notes on the wall, then you can put them in relationship, you can group them according to different types of relationships. This is all up to you and depends on the kinds of questions that you need answered. The final step in the interview process is the reporting of your data and your research results. This usually occurs in a technical report, anywhere from 3 to 10 pages. The first thing that you'll do is reflect on common themes across the interviews that emerge in the analysis. You'll illustrate those themes through specific examples. If, for example, you have a theme of optimization, you'll look back in your interview transcripts and your field notes for a specific person and moment and quote that illustrates that theme for your reader. Next, it's important to include diverse examples. In other words, if optimization is a truly important theme for your data analysis, try and include 2 or 3 different people explaining about why optimization is important. And finally, embrace conflict rather than run away from it. People may disagree on the terms of optimization, or some may think it's more important and some may think it's less important. That's a fact to be exploited rather than hidden. The strength of qualitative data and ethnographic research is that it allows for a full scope of opinions and understandings. So to recap the process of a data analysis, you write field notes, you transcribe interviews, you code them for themes, and then finally, you integrate the quotes and insights as you think through common analysis.